Hey everybody out there, happy Veterans Day. So this is going to wrap up our chapter on the socialization process, this process of learning how to participate in a culture and learning our society's norms that starts at birth and really goes throughout your entire life cycle. So we started earlier this week talking about what really happens during adolescence and how, I think this was the last slide we left off in class about how, when you're a teenager, which is really a new phenomenon that has only come about since the Civil War and has really kind of just taken hold in America more so after World War I, as kids started going to school and they were no longer forced to work. And, since they were going to school and then eventually after World War II it became more commonplace to go to high school, they weren't working, maybe just a few hours a week. They had time on their hands where they were going out with friends, they were dating, they were having fun, they were focused more so on perhaps careers, but also marriage and new opportunities. And we see this creation of this concept of teenager, which isn't something that all cultures have, right? Some societies just go from you're a child one day to some kind of ceremony that you're an adult the next. We don't have one complete rite of passage ritual. In our society, it's more so about smaller rituals, smaller rites of passage, which help mark this idea that you are changing, you are growing, you are turning into an adult. As you're 16 getting a driver's license, or you're 18 and you're voting, and you're 21 and you can buy all sorts of products, that adults can buy. So there's more so not just one complete process. And it's, of course, during these teenage years that peers are the major, group that is influencing you. And at this point, yes, your family is still important to you and you love them, but it's all about your peer group. And we spent a long time earlier this week talking about, how your friends were kind of part of your social circle and how they perhaps changed over time, because perhaps when you were younger, they were who lived near you or who was in your class. And then as you got older, it was more so about perhaps people that had the same interests as you, and how, over time, these people that were in your group, your clique, became very important to you. And the whole thing to understand is that, you need to have some kind of friends, some kind of people to bounce ideas off of that make you feel special, that make you, really as a boost to your self-concept. And unfortunately, it's when kids don't feel like they have an in group, that they're an outsider, that they're kind of an out, or, they're in the out group, so to speak, that they, they don't have any connections to anyone else. They don't belong into any of the school's cliques, because even though you might not like to admit it, they're out there. They exist in the teacher world. They exist all over the world, right? Everybody has their own little group that is important to them. And the kids who feel like they don't belong are more likely to perhaps participate in self-harm, suffer from mental health and depression, perhaps engage in violence. We know that when we talk about kids who participated in school shootings, you can talk a lot about mental health, you can talk a lot about guns, but really and truly a lot of those kids, the ones who've at least survived, or going back reading their journals, their online postings, they talked about, for the ones who didn't survive, how angry they were with their peers, how they felt left out, how they felt like they were bullied, how they felt like they were picked on. And it's, of course, it's not the stereotypical, which you see in the movies, throwing kids into a lock. It's about, cyberbullying. It's about purposely excluding someone. It's about leaving someone else. So, we did a little bit of a self-reflection the other day in class, right, as we looked at our community, our school, trying to figure out, who are these groups? Who are these cliques? And, in reality, I hope that there is no group at Geneseo that's as mean as those plastics from Mean Girls. I don't really think that there is, but it's important to kind of do that self-reflection or school reflection to identify kind of what is the community that we live in, and what are perhaps those hazards, or how do people get along in terms of their social interactions. It's kind of why we force you to do that survey, at some point during the year about, do you feel safe? Because they're trying to get a gauge on the climate of the school and the interactions and the respect level, to try to get a heads up ahead of time to see, if kids are getting along or if they not, because it's very hard, when you're a teacher, when you're a staff member, you don't get the full idea of what's really going on. And that's, of course, because we can't see your social media posts. So what we're going to talk about today is we're just going to kind of continue to talk about the issues that adolescents face, okay? Because, of course, this is the real stage where you're at in the life cycle. We're going to talk a little bit about dating today, because that's obviously something that some of you are already participating in, or if not, as you move into adulthood, you perhaps at one point will date someone and get married and have kids. And of course, you'll go from being in that family of orientation, right, that you were either born in or grew up in, the people you lived with, that you consider to be family. And eventually you'll go to this family of procreation, whether it's, whoever it is, someone you live with, someone you marry, someone that you have children with, children that you adopt. And of course, you may choose to remain single, and it may be you and your pet and your best friend or whatever your family is. But in time, it will be your next family. And of course, you'll go through those different stages of the life cycle later. But today we're going to talk a little bit about dating, and then we're going to wrap things up and we're going to talk about some of the problems just that teens face. And then we're going to talk about the last two agents of socialization very briefly, which is education and the media. Because we've already talked about the media a lot last week when it came to kind of its role in terms of helping create ideas about gender and influencing ideas about family and things like that. So we're going to talk just a little bit about dating here. And dating, this information is really found in chapter 5, but as I said before, our main focus for this chapter is really just chapter 4 you can stick to. If you want, you can read chapter 11 about the family, but we've thrown in some stuff from chapter 3 and from chapter 5, since, with COVID, we're kind of on a time crunch, and we're kind of making one larger, longer unit than perhaps we normally would. So dating, of course, is something that people have participated in, for hundreds, for thousands of years. And dating, though, has changed over time. And originally, when it was dating, the express purpose of dating someone was to marry them. So you would go from being of not dating age to there would be some kind of process or rite of passage in society where you would, especially if you were of a wealthier family, going to a party and kind of, dressing up for the first time and being allowed to dance and socialize with others as opposed to being kept at home because it was past your bedtime or because, there were adult activities going on that you weren't allowed to do. Of course, in some European countries where there were kings and queens, you would be, if you were wealthy, you'd be presented at court to the king and queen to show that you were out and about in society. And then as you started dating, though, the express purpose was to get married. And so you may be able to talk to members who you would be interested in potentially dating or really marrying for that purpose when you were in public and chaperoned. But you would not be allowed to have any kind of alone time with them. And of course, any kind of real communication with them would be watched and would be monitored. But the idea of dating, because it was simply fun and it was about recreation, that didn't really occur. Now, over time, of course, the ideas about dating have really relaxed. And luckily in American culture, we're allowed, I just feel like I'm all choked up for a second there. Sorry, guys. That's better. And in our American culture, we at least let you choose your partner. There are so many cultures around the world today, where they have arranged marriages. Growing up in the Chicago suburbs, one of my best friends she was born here in the U.S., but her parents were from India, and they were an arranged marriage. And it was just, very hard for me to understand that her parents, their marriage had been arranged, that from the time that they were born, their families had decided that they would be a good match for each other, that they were friends, that they, their children were born near the same time, that it would be, an exchange of wealth, of assets, and that they had similar values and opinions, and that they were destined to be together. And it surprised me even more that, even though this was an arranged marriage, it was a love marriage. Like over time, they did fall in love with each other, and then they chose to not only stay in India, but came to the U.S. to further their schooling, to be a doctor. I think the mom was a doctor, the dad was an engineer, but that was always, really different for me to, to understand. So luckily in the U.S., we've always focused, though, on you are allowed to pick your partner. Of course, we know that there's been more of a patriarchal system where, of course, it's been very traditional, and perhaps the father or uncle or grandfather has perhaps, put in some say about who women perhaps can date. And then, of course, before you do get married, it's been customary to perhaps ask the dad for permission. Obviously, it's not required by any means, but it was kind of one of those customary kind of ideas. It was also, of course, customary that you would be providing some kind of dowry or present the wife would be giving in her family to the husband upon, marrying. So lots of different kind of patriarchal traditions there. Now, over time, as we've gotten into the 20th century here, and, dating has not just been about courtship, it's been about getting to know someone more, still somewhat chaperoned, and then eventually marrying them. There's been in general a dating continuum, so to speak, where especially, going from the 1950s till present, in the past 70 years, we've seen that people perhaps are friends, very much so, or they're engaged to someone, they're introduced to someone on a blind date. And then there's some kind of steady going on, or some kind of formal kind of relationship where they're just exclusively dating one person. They're not just dating multiple people at the same time. And then, of course, there's some period of engagement and they're married. My mom will tell stories about from when she started dating my dad. Things were very different, apparently, in the late 60s to 70s. And she got married in the late 70s. That basically, when she started dating, you were allowed to date multiple people at one time. That was considered socially acceptable. So on Thursday night, you might go to the movies with one person, and then on Friday with a different person, on Saturday with somebody else. And so literally, like, your dating card, so to speak, as she called it, was full, and you would go on multiple dates with people and see if you liked them, and you were open to being with them. Now, today, we have kind of a different view on that. Like, people perhaps are talking to different people, I think you guys would say, and we'll call it talking. But, I don't think that you perhaps, openly pursue and go out like to different activities with different people. I don't think that's as widely accepted, but you guys would have to tell me. And then there would be, like, my mom called it going steady, and like my dad gave her his class ring to wear, and like his Letterman jacket from high school, and like they were like a couple. Just like, obviously, you may be in a committed relationship with someone, or you've been dating them for a long time, and if you haven't yet, no worries. It's like everybody's on their own path in life, and you'll meet someone that's special to you at that time. And then eventually there's some kind of period of engagement, and then you get married. And that is the same. But of course, whether you have to ask permission from a father or some kind of male figure, all that, of course, has changed today. And of course, there's no rules about how you get married or where you get married or religious ceremonies or anything like that, the way there are in other cultures. In general, though, there's a reason that people participate in dating. Once upon a time, as I said, dating was just all about courtship. You were getting married, and you were uniting two families, and perhaps your parents even had a big say in who you were marrying and trying to influence the situation because they were trying to unite people together who had similar values or religious beliefs or wealth. But of course, in our more modern, society, people are dating because it's fun and because they're looking for companionship. They're looking for someone to spend time with in terms of socialization, because it makes you feel good about yourself in terms of psychological needs, that somebody likes you, that you feel wanted or needed. Other people date perhaps because of status attainment, because now they can say that they have the achieved status of being a girlfriend, boyfriend, or having a significant other, if you don't like the terms girlfriend or boyfriend, if you don't identify with that. So ultimately, things really and truly have dating, and dating has changed so much, of course, even from when I've been in high school, in college till now, because dating on the internet was not really a thing yet. I can remember graduating from just about the time I was done with college, so maybe my early 2000s. My brother was one of the first people I remember I knew who was dating someone online, but he had met them through, I don't know, something online, some kind of group he was in. And then he started dating the person, and we all thought oh my gosh, don't go meet this girl. She's going to be a psycho killer. She'll be some stalker. But compared to today, I think about my much younger cousins who are a lot younger than me, and who are 10, 15 years younger. So they're mid-20s, late 20s. And they all met their significant others online, and that's how they're dating them. So things definitely are evolving and changing, and it'll be curious to see, how things continue to change in the future. As far as dating patterns, sociologists really and truly say that, you look at traditional dating, and we kind of saw this when we looked at, some of those, video clips about the family. And, of course, in some of those traditional family settings, or more traditional family settings that we saw, going back to Leave It to Beaver and shows like that, like I Love Lucy, there weren't any real dating episodes or clips that we saw in the Brady Bunch, but if we'd seen more videos of that, or if seen movies or talked to people who are older, they'll tell you that it's all about perhaps the man asking the woman to go on a date. And I say man asking the woman because, of course, if you're going back in traditional settings, most people, it was not going to be that they expressed whether they were, gay. They weren't going to be showing that on television shows as far as, a man asking a man on a date or a woman asking a woman, or however you identify in terms of those gender preferences. So it was the man was, initiating the date. He would pay for the date. He would open the woman's door. He would push her in the table, that kind of stuff. The focus was on, the couple. It was a very organized, formal structure. You would meet the mom and dad before you went on the date. You would walk someone to the door, and you went on that dating continuum that we said. But of course, today, dating doesn't have any kind of set pattern. Perhaps today it isn't, focused on this trajectory and this structure like it was. Some people feel like it's more stressful today because there are less labels and it's not acceptable to be, dating multiple people at once until you kind of declare that you're exclusive with some kind of ring or pin or something like that. And so if you are talking to multiple people at once, perhaps people will think less of you, be angered by that. That could be confusing. And according to sociologists, they claim that it focuses on the group more, that there's a lot of hanging out, being with friends, and that through friendships, relationships form. So the focus can be more on the group. And then eventually when you're kind of more or less going steady continuum, then it might be more on the couple. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what you guys think about that. But in general, it's more informal. There's no requirement that, one partner opens the door or pushes in the chair or pays for a check. Both genders initiate dates. And of course, we see that, everything is just changed in terms of even public affection displays and things like that. So it's definitely changed. And some people would say that it's for the better, and other people would say that it's for the worse. And yet again, that depends on your perspective and your values, and your morals. And of course, if you haven't had that much experience with dating yet, that's perfectly fine. Everyone is going to meet that right person at one point in their life, if that's what they're looking for. And of course, that's why there's become a lot of, dating websites online to help you find that person, especially if they're not living in your community. So we just want to talk a little bit about, so far we've talked a lot about, the role that friends play in your life. And of course, whether they're, positive influences or negative influences, depending on, which clique, which group you identify with, whether your parents like them or not, because perhaps they're influencing you to do your homework, to attend charity work, or are they influencing you to go out and party? Are they influencing you to sleep all day, to, do violent things, to mistreat others? So your peers have this big influence on you to think outside the box, especially as you're trying to develop your self-concept, and you're trying to kind of constantly combat these ideas of what you want to do, the I, compared to what society says you should do, the me, at least according to Mead's ideas about, your personality and how your self-concept is formed. And we've talked a little bit about how dating is perhaps one of the problems, but also one of the joys of adolescence, and how it can, make your life a little bit more chaotic, but also perhaps more fun at the same time as you are, really moving towards an adult, okay, and then receiving more of those rites of passage. And last but not least here, we're going to talk about just some of the major issues impacting teens today. And if we were in class, I would have asked you guys to make a list of these things. And in fact, the last journal you're going to be doing in class Thursday, Friday, or remote learners will do it from home Thursday, Friday. We'll be talking about what you personally have kind of encountered as the major problems impacting teens today. And some kids might say they don't get enough sleep. That's a common one I hear. And sociobiologists literally claim that, especially during the adolescent years, your body is still growing and changing, and you need to sleep more than ever. It's why some schools, on the West Coast have really pushed for later start times for school, because your body, your brain needs that sleep. But at the same time, if we start school later, it creates problems on the other end, because how do you work a shift after school? How do you do more clubs and activities or things like that? Other kids would say, of course, gangs. Okay, that's not something that we have a big problem with, but especially depending on where you live, gangs can be a problem. Drugs, will always be a problem. Alcohol, peer pressure in general to party, to do these things. Bullying is more important than ever before. I think, gosh, you guys were probably freshmen or maybe sophomores, right? When we had Brooks Gibbs come and talk about bullying, right? And how he was bullied as a child, for the way he looked, for the way he talked, for his attitude, and he learned to stand up to bullies and to not let it bother him, and of course makes money now off of trying to inspire others. I don't know how inspiring he was. I thought he had a great message, but I don't know how well it was received. But bullying has taken off. Teen pregnancy is always an issue. Suicide, of course, right, as it really kind of hits closer to home, at the moment, is always an issue, especially, with kids self-harming themselves. They said a lot of numbers went up potentially, during quarantine as people felt isolated and alone because there were people in their lives who, couldn't get to them, couldn't check on them, couldn't see the warning signs, and just violence in general, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's violence in school with school shootings, violence in communities. I'd be curious your list. Maybe it includes environmental issues you're worried about. Maybe it's stress of the future, right? Typical adolescent problems at home, fighting with your parents. But those are some of the major issues impacting teens, at least that sociologists would identify, especially on the conflict perspective. And I want to talk just a little bit more about bullying. Bullying, of course, is something that we feel like is harder for teachers to catch than ever before. When I started teaching, I felt like bullying was something we would see more in the class and we could catch. And it would be a snide remark made in class, usually that you could hear, or some inside kind of private joke that kids would say as they did partner work or group work about some other student in the class that they disliked. And not to have a gender bias here, but in general, at least in my experience, it was often a boy that was making that comment in class. But I also saw bullying girls against girls, and that really was more on the exclusionary type. It was girls angry that they were not included in something, so then they would purposely try to divide some kind of social group and divide the clique. And, in terms of group interaction, there was clearly some kind of person who was the head honcho, who was trying to control the other group members, who was trying to be the leader, and was trying to get the groups, other people to conform to their viewpoint. Because in groups, sometimes there's cooperation, where everyone's working together, but other times there's coercion, where one person is kind of forcing the others to do something. And unfortunately, sometimes there's groupthink, where you get other people to side with your opinions, and they're afraid basically to speak up, and that can be detrimental. Groupthink is something that sociologists have studied for years, like when they look at the Challenger, which was a spaceship that exploded in 1985. I was only, I think, 3 at the time. When they go back and they look at why that spaceship blew up and why there were innocent civilians on board, including a school teacher, they all, of course, end up dying, and it was very short after takeoff. The scientists later who worked for NASA said, well, we had some of our doubts, but we were afraid to speak up because the boss wanted it to go on. It was a big scheduled flight. It was supposed to make all this money. So, groupthink really does kind of occur. And unfortunately, people are afraid to speak up. And then they end up just standing by and letting something happen. It's also kind of what we see, why people let people get bullied. And they are bystanders. It turns out that if you see an accident and you're the only one around, you're more likely to go and help. But if there's a group of people and they see that someone is injured, getting bullied, getting attacked, you're more likely just to walk away, to put it out of your mind. It's called the bystander effect. You just assume that someone else will help and do something, and you just basically let it happen. And in this day and age, it's more so really about cyberbullying, right? And that's why, over the years, don't ever think that what you, post in terms of something that you make in terms of a comment or pictures that you take, that you send to someone else, or anything that you do in your life, that it can't come back to haunt you, because that's all being recorded in social media somewhere. Officer Steins is going to come in and talk to us when we get to our next unit on crime and deviance. And he'll tell you firsthand that a lot of his job is about contacting Snapchat to get images, to get pictures, to get things from Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, the WhatsApp, whatever it is that you use, TikTok. Even though you delete it, they still have that on their server. And if there is reason to believe that it is harmful to others, if it encouraged violence, if it encouraged someone to kill themselves or to kill others, or in any way, shape, or form was against the law, they will get the subpoena from the courts and then they will go and get it. And so that stuff is never really gone forever. But we see in this day and age, it's really about excluding people, making comments online, dissing the picture that they posted, giving them put downs. And then unfortunately, of course, it often leads, especially to kids who are already struggling with their mental health, perhaps to commit violence, right, against others or against themselves. And schools have tried to bring in, bullying campaigns, awareness weeks. The media has tried to stop it. Parents are trying to get more involved, but really and truly, that's why we talk about cliques and how people get along, because it helps us to kind of take the temperature of the school. And it helps, us to get an idea when you complete those surveys, because we don't want people to ever feel that isolated that they want to harm themselves or to harm others. And the number one most common form of violence is, of course, bullying. 28% of 12 to 18-year-olds reported being bullied in 2005, which is up from 5% in 1999. Now, these statistics are from your book by the CDC, and your book is a decade old at this point. So at this point, I'm going to say it's a lot higher than that, than 28%. In fact, I'd be curious to see, how many of you felt like you were bullied at one point or another, or you feel like you'd engaged in bullying, or you were the bullies, I should say. And of course, we talk about bullying a lot because, there's so many reports out constantly about kids who are bullied, and then they feel like no one is around to support them. You can hear the bells are still on. And eventually, many of these people who are struggling with mental health, if they feel isolated, they feel alone, they decide to kill themselves. And we see that the rate of suicide amongst teens in the US has doubled in the last 30 years. It kind of goes through patterns, through ups and downs, where we saw, a lot of highs in the 80s, and then it went down, and then it went up, and then it went down, and then unfortunately it's up again. And of course, they're saying that that's probably related to COVID-19, to people feeling isolated, to people feeling depressed. It's the third cause of death among 5 to 24-year-olds, behind accidents and homicides, most of those being gun-related or school shooting-related. And they say that a youth basically kills himself once every 2 hours in the U.S., and the actual number of suicides is probably much higher. Some of them are getting misreported as accidents where perhaps they were investigated properly, perhaps the parents tried to hide what happened. It's hard to say the situation, but obviously all of us at this point know, someone who has committed suicide, and they haunt us. I can tell you that as a teacher, I've had students die over the years, whether they've graduated already or not, and every single time they haunt you of what could have been different. How could we have changed things? How could we have reached out and helped? Usually what happens with suicide, that's kind of the reason why I wanted to do this lecture remotely as opposed to in person, and we spent a long time talking about cliques on Monday too, because we'd rather have that part in person and this part remotely, because it is a hard topic to talk about. But usually there's some kind of, there could be alcohol and drug abuse. There is some kind of trigger events of something that was going on in their lives that made them feel perhaps even more emotionally depressed, isolated, on their own, which is really kind of motivating them to do it. And of course, we know that women are more likely to attempt suicide, but they often try with pills. Men are more likely to actually commit suicide and be successful because they use guns. They're more likely to hang themselves, things like that. And unfortunately, we do see a cluster effect where one student often kills themselves and another student then is kind of idolizing that behavior and then unfortunately does it as well. Now, a lot of people have talked about the show 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. I've never seen it. Some people obviously have said that it is too glamorous, that it makes people idolize suicide, that it makes it look cool in some ways. I know that season 1 they said was pretty different than season 2. I haven't watched either one, but they said that perhaps season 2 handled that problem better. I'm not entirely sure. I'd be curious to see if you guys have watched it or what your thoughts on that are as to, does it encourage suicide? Because you never want to make it seem glamorous or anything. So those are really the big issues that are facing teens. And the last two agents of socialization, remember, because there's four: family influences your behavior, friends or peers influence your behavior, and the last two are school and the mass media. And I posted a couple of video clips about school. One just focuses on the inequity of schools, about how it's all about money. And of course, kids who live in school districts where there's money have a better education. I grew up in the wealthy Chicago suburbs, so we had, tennis courts and indoor swimming pools and huge, like we had like the facility, but we also had, football stadiums and baseball stadiums, and I mean, just amazing stuff. We had a wrestling gym just like we have here, but we had so many more students, AP classes and technology, and it was only, the late 90s. So the more money that you have, the better quality teachers that you can afford in terms of training and experience and technology and sporting equipment and just facilities. And I also posted a video clip. Oh, I'm gonna hit pause. Looks like music time. Okay, minute music's over. So yeah, those videos that I posted about education just talk about how it's inequity, and how I was telling you that in the Chicago schools, I was at a very wealthy school that had all these different, facilities and teachers and equipment. And then I posted a video clip. One's just very general, talking about how wealth really impacts the quality of education you're going to get. The other video clip is old. It's from 6 years ago, but things really haven't changed all that much in the 6 years. And it shows Philadelphia schools where, in an attempt to cut money, they cut teachers, and they're very overcrowded. Instead of building a second school, they just shove more kids in the room. And that video clip shows that there's like 64 kids in that class. Yeah, 64 kids. And I counted the desks in my room. I had 30 last year, and if I put all the kids at the lab tables, I could fit another 24. And if I put 4 kids at each of my 2 tables that I used to have in the back, I could fit, potentially 60, 64 people in here, but it'd be insane. Totally bizarre, especially because now I feel like when we have our classes of 12, I don't know, I've gotten used to that in a small group size. I can't imagine if there were like 60 people in a room. And of course, that means those kids get a lot less help because, their teacher's busy. They can't really do labs. They can't really do anything. And then I also posted a video clip about just how COVID is impacting education, and how, there's long-term worries that kids will lose out on skills, that they won't do as well on standardized tests. It may affect their job prospects. So there's a lot of issues going on. But the whole point of school is that it helps Americanize you. It's why they came out with it, really in the 20th century, as more immigrants came to America. It impacts you early on in your elementary school years because it's teaching you the social norms and the values. And there is perhaps a hidden curriculum that, even though, the manifest purpose of school is to teach you to reading, writing, and mathematics, there is this, latent function or unintended function of schools where you learn about how to take turns and share and be polite and be respectful and, listen to others' point of views, which aren't necessarily like the key standards or parts of the content that will be tested per se on an exam. And there is a hidden curriculum, meaning that, each teacher has their own perspective or point of view, and that perhaps comes across to the students. So for example, I don't ever like to share my political views with you guys because I don't think it's my right, and I don't think it's my purpose. I don't want to ever influence, your views on politics. But some teachers don't do that. Like, for example, my son Alex was telling me that, like, his 3rd grade teacher, they were talking about the election, was telling them who she voted for and why. And, he definitely was very impressionable, and she was really influencing, his thoughts. So, you really have to think about that as an educator. There could be a hidden curriculum when kids are absorbing what you say and are influenced on it. The last one is just the mass media. And once upon a time, they said that the mass media was the most influential agent. And we're talking about TV, news, radio, music, magazine ads, newspapers, books, you name it. And they said television was the most influential. But this data that sociologists use is based off of the 60s and 70s. Well, yeah, of course TV was the most influential medium, especially on adolescents and young people. They haven't done a ton of research about modern day, but they're starting to do more. And now, of course, it's really social media that's impacting kids in the 21st century, and especially for Generation Z. All right, guys, that wraps us up. Have a great day. So get the rest of these notes down, do your review questions, do that peer socialization worksheet. Tomorrow in class, we'll talk about the review sheet. We'll play Kahoot. I'll take any questions on this last lecture, and we'll do one more journal perhaps, and then you'll be doing the test over the weekend starting on Friday. Have a great day, guys. Later.